UK's biggest banks are rescued by the British taxpayer. The world's central banks act together to slash interest rates, and yet the International Monetary Fund warns we're facing a major economic downturn. £50 billion of taxpayers' money will be offered to strengthen banks' balance sheets in return for shares. £200 billion will then be offered to banks in short-term loans by the Bank of England in an effort to get them lending to each other again. Those interbank loans will be underwritten by a further £250 billion of taxpayers.
Jets are being sent to Libya, courtesy of the British taxpayer. The announcement comes as the armed forces are hit by a wave of redundancies as the country continues to tighten its belt. And as RT's Laura Emmett reports, the intervention, along with the cutbacks, has left people in the UK questioning their democratic rights.
A winter of discontent that's becoming a seething spring. British streets regularly filling with massive anti-government protests which start peacefully but routinely turn violent. Their fury is over swingeing spending cuts by a coalition government they say no one wants, and now a new foreign war. But democracy in Britain, which it prides itself on and keenly exports, is wearing thin for some.
I don't think they're listening to anyone at the moment. They're just making up their own mind about everything, really. We don't have a say in anything whatsoever.
I don't see that the government will do anything about this, like they didn't do anything about the tuition fees. I've come today because I work in social care. I'm a social care recruitment consultant. I find it ridiculous how much money they're spending in Libya at the moment, like sending planes over there, sending troops over there, and taking money away from us. They should be spending more money at home.
But the will of these people is one which lawmakers willingly ignore. While a TV News poll suggested 43% of people oppose military intervention in Libya, their elected MPs voted overwhelmingly in favour.
The government has announced its largest cuts in public spending since World War II. The new austerity plans will have the budget slashed by £83 billion and cut around 500,000 public sector jobs. Thousands have taken to the streets to oppose such measures. It follows cuts announced yesterday to the country's defence budget, worth almost $5 billion.
Jack Crowley, the Member of Parliament for Birmingham. Why are you out here today? I'm here to support the young people of Birmingham and the youth workers of Birmingham. It's absolutely wrong that the bankers who caused the crisis, it's the young people of Birmingham and their youth workers who will pay the price. 43 youth projects closing, 150 youth workers being made redundant. What Birmingham now faces is a lost generation of young people. Soaring tuition fees, cuts in educational maintenance allowance, rapidly rising unemployment amongst the young in Birmingham, and now the closure of their much-needed youth clubs and youth facilities. It's wrong, and I will be fighting against it.
On Thursday, a man travelling in a minicab was shot in an arrest operation. A non-police firearm was recovered from the scene. For police to open fire, they must believe there's an imminent threat. The man they shot was Mark Duggan. His death is now being investigated by the Independent Police Complaints Commission. It was from the Broadwater Farm Estate in Tottenham that yesterday's protest march set off. Many here knew Mark Duggan.
They killed him, and, because they were low onto themselves, they could put all these things in the paper saying he was this, he was that, I don't see my friend being in the car, and surrounded by armed police, and he's going to jump out and open fire on armed police. How does that make sense?
Communicate directly with the youth here, and it's caused the problem, so they feel that they have no word and no voice. The voice that they think is good, but which is wrong, is actually smashing up things, so they'll see their voice get heard.
But there's anger at outsiders who are said to have come into the area to be part of mob violence.
I've seen people here I've never seen in my life. Yeah, I said to people, I honestly believe there was even one of the anarchists that was flowing in the area as well. So opportunities were bound to come down.
That we recognise with the cut in youth services, frustration with young people around issues around stop and search, and a whole range of issues. This was, maybe this was a catalyst.
Well, when you talk about community relations, the problem for the police is this, that they had good relations, really first-class relationships with great swathes of the community, 95% of the community. This isn't the people represented by community leaders who are doing this damage. What you have here is an underlying criminal culture. It's not thousands of people, it's a few hundred.
By Dr. Howe, who is a writer and broadcaster, and we can speak to him now, and Marcus Dow is in Croydon. Marcus Dow, are you shocked by what you've seen there last night?
No, not at all. I have been living in London for 50 years. There are so many different moods and moments. But what I was certain about, listening to my grandson and my son, is that something very, very serious was going to take place in this country. Our political leaders had no idea. The police had no idea. But if you looked at young blacks and young whites with a discerning eye and a careful hearing, they had been telling us, and we would not listen, that what is happening in this country to them.
Mr. Howe, if I can just stop you, Mr. Howe, for a moment. You say you're not shocked. Does this mean that you condone what happened in your community last night?
I condone, of course not. What I'm going to condone it for, what I'm concerned about more than anything else, there is a young man called Mark Duggan. He has parents, he has brothers, he has sisters, and few yards away from where he lives, a police officer blew his head off.
Well, Mr. Howe, we have to...
Let me finish.
Mr. Howe, we have to wait for the official inquiry before we can say things like that. We don't know what happened to Mr. Duggan. We are going to wait for the police report on it. If I can take you on a little bit, you were talking about your grandson, you were talking about young people. You were talking about your grandson, you were talking about...
They have been stopping and searching young blacks for no reason at all. I have a grandson, he's an angel, and he began to think he was coming of age when the police slapped him up against the wall and searched him, and he thought he had now had a gold star. I asked him the other day, apropos of a sense that something was going seriously wrong in this country. I said, how many times have the police searched you? He said, Papa, I can't count. There's so many times.
Mr. Howe, that may well have happened, and if you say it did, I am not to gainsay you, but that is not an excuse to go out rioting and cause the sort of damage that we have been seeing over the last few days.
Where were you in 1981 in Brixton? I don't call it rioting, I call it an insurrection of the masses of the people. It is happening in Syria, it is happening in Clapham, it's happening in Liverpool, it's happening in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and that is the nature of the historical moment.
Mr. Howe,
Mr.
Howe, if I can just ask you, you are not a stranger to riots yourself, I understand, are you? You have taken part in them yourself.
I have never taken part in a single riot. I've been on demonstrations that ended up in a conflict, and have some respect for an old West Indian Negro and stop accusing me of being a rioter. Because you want to tell me to get abusive. You just sound idiotic. Have some respect.
Dr. Howe,
grandchildren.
Thank you very much for joining us from Croydon. Dr. Howe, writer and broadcaster.